Creating Inclusive and Healing Communities for Those Who Identify as LGBTQ webinar. Our agenda for today is going to be pretty simple. We are going to be talking about sexual violence in the LGBTQ community. We're going to be talking about coming out. We do have a representative from a local center here who's going to be talking about their center, and so we're going to be spotlighting a center, local center in Pennsylvania. And should you have any questions or need any answers after we're done with the webinar today, then just make sure to contact us. Our information is at the end. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. So again, welcome. There are actually going to be 3 of us negotiating the training today, bringing forth all of our information to you. My name is Katie Taylor. I'm the Technical Assistance Coordinator for PCAR. That is my information there, my phone number and my email address.
And I am Liz Zadnick. I'm the Education Resource Coordinator here at PCAR, and you can reach me at the email or extension listed.
And my name is Eric Stiles. I'm a Sexual Assault Counselor for Sargos, Lebanon County, and there's my information as well.
So to start off our discussion today, I wanted to briefly go over what sexual violence is and how it operates in society. So a way to look at sexual violence is as a spectrum, not necessarily one isolated incident, but a number of different behaviors, trends, comments that can be made always and in public around other folks. So these categories or characteristics are not necessarily exhaustive of sexual violence, but is a way to really begin a conversation about what happens that impacts individuals and communities. So this tool really helps talk about sexual violence as more than a single act, but as a way our culture and society controls individuals who do not conform to what's set out for them. It is represented in the fear of assault, in the access to bodies, and in the comments made about those bodies. So if we look at sexual violence as a spectrum, we also have to look at it existing within norms and culture. So as we may or may not know, all of the actions or behaviors on the spectrum happen in a society where inequality and power imbalances exist. So all of our lived experiences and perspectives are important when considering how sexual violence can impact someone. So if we're looking at how bodies are seen as healthy and normal, who can fall into that category, what relationships are seen as valid or as the only option, and how there can only be 2 genders and how that could be very limiting to someone, how men are seen as the leaders or are superior, the emphasis placed on physical appearance, and then also how white or light-skinned individuals may have more power than others. So if we're looking at sexual violence, we also have to look at how inequality impacts the experiences of those individuals and those survivors. So I think that's really important as we go and we talk about individuals and communities who identify as LGBTQ, keeping all of this in mind. We also want to begin any conversation about addressing our own beliefs and biases that we have. So taking the time to self-reflect on the perception and myths held about sexual assault in general, but then also sexual assault within and without the LGBTQ communities. It's really important, as with the work of ending any oppression, to identify and address our own preconceived notions, stereotypes, fears that may exist when we talk to others.
Now we're going to move on to the coming out process, and keeping in mind the coming out process is a very integral part of understanding victim survivors within the LGBTQ community. So we're going to start with a working definition, and then we're going to go into some of the layers, just a few of the layers that exist for folks who identify as LGBTQ and how coming out impacts them in a variety of ways. So a working definition is coming out is an ongoing process that some LGBTQ identified people use to tell themselves, family, friends, and society about their sexual orientation and or gender identity. It's very important to realize that not all people are fully out, if you will, in society, and some people may never be there, and then there are varying levels, and we're going to go through that in a moment. So just keeping in mind, coming out is an ongoing process. It absolutely happens every day, all the time. Coming out always doesn't look quite this pretty in this picture, and we chose this picture for a reason, because when a person is deciding to come out, it's negotiating safety, and there's a lot of fear involved in some certain situations. And so when a person does come out of the closet, if you will, they don't always step into this beautiful sort of rose garden of situations. Sometimes what's on the other side isn't always welcoming for them, which is why it's so important for our rape crisis centers to create safe spaces for LGBTQ victim survivors.
So much like Katie said, coming out is not a one-time process. It can happen multiple times within a person's lived experience, within their day, within their year, and within their life. So this is really important to remember as we think about developing really intentional networks of support as we work with survivors, planning for safety, and then also looking at how programming can be delivered. So for example, someone, and this is just an example of a process, so someone might first come out to themselves. So they identify a certain way, and they decide that this is who I am. And then they may choose to tell the folks closest to them, or the people that they feel they can trust, that they can be safe with. Sometimes this can be friends and family, but not always. Another example would be to be out to their family members or doctors, and this is, again, another type of situation, so it might necessitate coming out to a physician, to someone that's providing some level of care. Another example might be out to friends, neighbors, a hairstylist, the police, in the case of some survivors of violence, specifically sexual violence, may need to come out to a police officer or a law enforcement officer at some point in the process. Here's another example of how a survivor may need to, again, adapt who they're coming out to. They might come out to you as a counselor or as an educator or an advocate. They might be out to everybody. This is really an ongoing process that can change, again, within a day, week, year, or life. Coming out is really always about negotiating safety. Who can I trust with this information? Who can I be with in a very honest and authentic way?
And coming out also is a process that when you start negotiating these safety patterns, your safety level changes throughout the day. So you start the day, you go to work, you might feel safer at work than you do at the gym. So at work, you might have a coworker that knows. At the gym, you don't. When you start bringing in the issue of sexual violence, it's a double-edged sword. You have to really negotiate both areas and how much harm and threat can come to you. So who's going to be perceived as being able to listen to you as being a victim of sexual assault, if you choose that to be the first and primary concern, and then do you choose to tell me that you're gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender? And you start negotiating that. So you rate the person. So if you go into a center and you're a male, first thing might be off the top of your head is, will they even accept me as being a male sexual assault survivor? And then if they get past that stumbling block and you get past that and you feel safe enough, then you say, well, will they perceive me as being less than if I'm gay? So can I come out as being gay or bisexual? This process gets constantly negotiated, and it only amplifies when you have a victim of violence. So if you go back to some of the slides that she was mentioning about the police, the doctors, if you're transgendered and you're thrust into a hospital ER, sometimes the coming out process is not of your own choosing. It's thrust upon you. Because of an examination or the police officer trying to get a report. So when you as a counselor goes into that situation, being aware that they might not have chosen to come out and that now there's a a harm caused by someone pulling them out of the closet is also something you can help mitigate and actually show comfort for and help build resiliency.
Now we're going to talk about coming out and counseling, and this is specific to folks who are counselor advocates, direct service staff who work exclusively or the majority of their time with counseling victim survivors. What we wanted to do was put together a list for folks of terms and techniques for you to use while you're counseling that may help the victim survivor feel more comfortable and help your advocacy and your counseling time be more productive with this person. So here are some terms that victim survivors might use in counseling when they're talking about their significant others or their partners, which are the first two terms. So a person might identify in their relationship, the other person in their relationship, as a partner, as a significant other. They might choose various pronouns. There are many, many other pronouns out there besides just she, he, his, and hers. There are many other pronouns out there that they might choose to use, sometimes a blending of those pronouns that I just said, or sometimes not using those pronouns at all. Another thing that they might do, again, going off of what I just said, is that they might not use any pronouns when they're talking about their partner or their significant other or loved one. They might leave out pronouns or gender identification altogether, which you might think is maybe difficult to do, but for folks who are in this situation, they practice it so often that it might be so quote-unquote natural for them that you might not even pick up on it at first, that they're actually not identifying the gender of the person that they're talking about. So that's something to be aware of in counseling. Also, I have girlfriend and boyfriend up there because they might use those terms to discuss their partner that is of a same gender or same sexual orientation as them. So they might use those terms, which are traditional terms. They also might use husband, wife, etc. And of course, there are many, many, many more. We could do an entire training just on the terminology and language. But those are some things to keep in mind when you're in counseling with victim survivors. Also, some techniques that you can use.
If you, when you just, the intake process, if you have a self-intake form where they put information down about themselves, have on their terms of partner or significant other, have terms for them to disclose if they feel comfortable. Just seeing in writing that you're open to hearing if they're LGBTQ might open the client up for later in sessions to come out. Also techniques, if a person starts talking about you play the pronoun game. If you hear them not mention pronouns, you don't use pronouns. Don't assume someone is married. Don't assume someone, female is dating a male. Don't say, well, how's your boyfriend? Say, how's your partner? How's your significant other? Use terms that are vague as well. Let them define. They will define with you, and then you go along with those terms. And it can change over time. If you work with a client who's very scared up front, very fearful, very frightened, and rightly so, they might start off using terms, well, if a female client comes in, my husband does X, Y, and Z. Then down the road says, my girlfriend, my wife, and then to disclose to you that she's actually been talking about her wife or her girlfriend. Or you might have a person who's bisexual who might be talking about two different partners at two different time periods, and you might be hearing boyfriend and the girlfriend. So don't assume, let them identify, go with the flow.
And also there are a menu of options that you can use while you're in counseling so that you don't assume, and that these are with everybody. So even if you are making the assumption that the person is not LGBTQ, we highly encourage you not to ever assume that. Don't ever assume someone is quote-unquote heterosexual or quote-unquote straight. Always be sort of err on the side of safety and creating safe space and provide a menu of options. And Eric does this in his program.
Yes, and we give the menu of options by offering them to self-identify through different terms. We give the menu of options for when they're talking about your partner, husband, your wife. You kind of just throw it all out there on the table. If you throw it on the table, they can pick from that. And if they are heterosexual and they do disclose to you heterosexuality, which is common, what you'll find is that they often have LGBTQ youth in their family and somebody they can talk about. So you showing that you're even open to that population can even make it safer for your survivors who are not directly part of the population because they are allies themselves.
Some more techniques for you to use in counseling is allow victim survivors to come out at their own pace. And we're going to be talking about this throughout the webinar, throughout the training. It's very, very important to allow people to come out at their own pace and not to pressure people to come out at any time. So if you're sitting there as a counselor and you are pretty sure you know what's going on, don't feel as if you need to force that in order to prove that you are a friendly person to the LGBTQ community. Because as we've talked about many times, coming out is negotiating safety, and in creating a safe space, you want that person to disclose whatever at their own pace. So don't feel that you need to rush that process.
And two things to think about when you have your perceptions. They are only your perceptions. There's a female client that can come into your office and be perceived as being that of maybe the lesbian or bisexual community, when in actuality she is taking every feminine quality away from herself to make a wall and a barrier so she does not get assaulted again. I've seen that happen with young individuals. They're not gay, they're not lesbian, they're not bisexual. However, conversely, they might be. Let them be fine. Also, with coming out, you can go back in the closet, and that is very important to give your clients the room to go back in their closet if it's not safe emotionally for them to go where they need to go when they're talking. If it's not safe at home, if it's not safe in other environments, you can find the only safe place they might have that control is in your session. So if they decide to go back in the closet, or they decide to start talking to you about, well, now I'm dating women again, that's fine. You just go with it. Our job is not to pull anybody anywhere. Coming out is not an end result. The one of the previous slides we had coming out, and the individual was out to everybody in her or his sphere. That is not the end result for coming out. Coming out is individualized for the basis and time of where you're at. So if you're 65 years old in a senior citizen home, you might only have 3 people you've come out to in that senior citizen home, and that's good enough. So our job is not to have the whole senior citizen home know that they've come out and they are gay when we're working with the sexual victimization they've incurred.
Also, another technique for you to use is obviously be comfortable in your own language. And what that means is we're about to go over terms in a little bit. We're going to talk about the L, the G, the B, the T, the Q, and et cetera. But if you're not comfortable using those words, that is going to come off in your counseling session to that other person. So make sure that when you're in counseling or before you even step into that room, make sure you're comfortable saying lesbian, queer, bisexual. Practice the words either with your coworkers or, I know it sounds silly, but it actually helps, go home and just say the words to yourself in front of a mirror so that you can see your own face when you're saying it. As you know, as counselors, body language is crucial in a counseling setting. So if you start using the words and all of a sudden you're fidgeting or becoming uncomfortable, the other person is going to pick up on that, and then they're just not going to talk to you anymore about this problem.
And it's okay to be it's encouraged to be genuine in your session. So if you have an individual who comes in and they say, I was called queer at school today, or I was called fag, which is both terms that are derogatory, it's okay to show your discomfort with that term and go along with them. And it's okay for you to say, that term, to me, brings up this negative reaction. And you can express that in session, that you can be comfortable, but you're going to be hearing terms that you may not hear as blunt, may not hear as direct if you make that safe space. So when that comes, just let it wash over you, and you can be genuine in the moment and express yourself. That does not mean, however, I don't feel comfortable saying gay. I don't feel comfortable talking about lesbians. You have to be very comfortable with the very basics. Okay.
So now we really want to offer some tips and strategies for those who are presenting education or prevention programs in schools and in their community. So again, to revisit this and to continue the conversation, terms and the power of language can have a huge impact when you're presenting a program about healthy relationships, about bullying, about bystander engagement. Your use of terms to describe healthy relationships is going to have an impact on every individual in your classroom or in the room. When you're talking about characteristics of all healthy relationships, it's important to really validate and empower however someone chooses to identify or participate or engage in a relationship. And I could also stress, again, what Katie mentioned about practicing language, about being comfortable, about being genuine when you're using the terms and when you're having discussions around gender identity, around sexual orientation, if you have that opportunity, or about relationships in general. When you're talking in the classroom, some of the issues that you might encounter with LGBTQ identified students or students who are perceived to be LGBTQ, they may only come out to you if you provide that space within the classroom. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. They may be afraid that their parents, that other students, other teachers or educators will find out about their sexual orientation or gender identity. And they might already be out or have been outed by another student. So I think what's really important to think about here is what's going on not only within the classroom, but outside of the classroom, and how a lot of the media attention and activism and movement progress that has happened, many folks believe that LGBTQ issues are no longer an issue, that everyone is equal, that everyone has the same rights within a space, and this is not true. And this is not cultivating a safe space for these individuals. So you might have to put in a little bit of extra effort, a little bit of extra time, a little bit more intention to really cultivate that dialogue, to create that safe space. You want to meet the needs of the individuals in the classroom, much like you would in a counseling session with a survivor. And that's really rooted in our movement, that's really rooted in our principles and practice. And I think that's very important when you're talking to youth, to students.
And also feel comfortable enough to call it not a safe space.
Yes.
If the room has not been created and the safe space cannot be created because there is bullying, active harassment in the room that you're working in, feel free to end the workshop. Feel free to call it not a safe space. Talk to administration, talk to teachers, come back to them in a different way, rework the situation, because not all classrooms can be made into a safe place. Not all places can be made safe. So it's your ability as the prevention educator and advocate for victims to, make a safe place and move it someplace else if need be. So you can call it.
Absolutely. And something that you can do as an educator or an advocate is to be a visible ally to those individuals who may identify as LGBTQ. So like Eric said, if you can't make the whole space, the room, the school, wherever you are a safe space, you can create a small, almost bubble around yourself where someone can come to you and you can be recognized as an ally. And similar to the counseling process, allow the student to come out at their own pace. Never assume about a person or a student their gender identity or their sexual orientation. Something that proactively you can do is if you recognize that something is happening, gender bullying, sexual harassment, inappropriate comments, hurtful, violent comments, is address them either in the time, if you feel comfortable, if you feel like you have those skills, that you can negotiate that, or if you can go to a teacher, if you want to follow up with that teacher or that school after with some resources to help. Those are all ways that you can really make sure the classroom is a space where you can have a conversation.
And also with that, when you negotiate that harassment and bullying that you perceived, if you feel comfortable in your skills to address it, like Liz said, that's very good because and especially if the victim's in the room and the survivor's in the room, because they see someone stand up for them. So often you'll hear teachers say, well, I don't want to address it in front of that student because I don't want to make it an issue. There's a difference between saying, Liz is being bullied in this classroom right now, would you talk to me about why you're calling her a lesbian, versus you're using the term over here, lesbian, Katie, what's that all about? Can we talk about that? What's that term mean for you? And especially she used the more derogatory term. You don't use Liz as the example, the token in the room, but instead you address the person who's the aggressor and the person bullying, and you use your skills. It comes back to the basic feminist movement and the ideals that we hold very dear.
Exactly, and especially if you're talking about sexual harassment, you're just tapping into those skills using different language, kind of working a conversation within the room about what was said, and it's just slightly different, but really not. So. When you're working within the community, this is an excellent opportunity to collaborate, to build coalitions, to be a voice, and to be another visible ally. Go to local events and network. Look for opportunities where youth can get involved in their schools, to become peer educators, to be talking to one another about these issues, about promoting healthy relationships among all, talking about healthy sexuality, talking about standing up and intervening when they see something happening. And then also cross-training community partners, sharing what skills and knowledge you have and how you can talk to them about their role in ending sexual violence and your role in helping end the oppression of LGBTQ identified individuals and communities.
And if I may add, just remember that what Liz said about the bubble that you carry around, that you create, that goes to all local events, all networking opportunities, not just the gay pride, not just the GSAs you go to, not just the rooms you feel like, for lack of a better term, you're preaching to the choir. It goes into those police stations. It goes into the hospital. It goes into these other areas that may be more daunting and more scary. If you feel that fear, imagine what your clients feel when they have to interact with these agencies. So when you carry that bubble around, it doesn't stop as soon as you exit that event where you're talking about gay or lesbian. It continues with you. That's part of being a very proactive ally. Now remember, keep your own safety.
Right.
However,
and it's a process for you, too. You're always going to be learning. If you identify as an ally, that's something that, again, you're going to have to learn about, to reflect on, to see how you can always grow and whether there's areas for improvement. I think that's also really important, to be patient with yourself, to take care of yourself, and to be patient with this process.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about LGBTQ sexual violence prevalence. We feel it's really important to include some statistics, and we're doing it at this time in the presentation so that you have a full, broad sort of scope of the problem in general. And now we're going to get into some specific statistics from the LGBTQ community. And I'm going to go over these fairly quickly, but again, if you have questions at the end, if you would like to see some of this research, our contact information is at the end, and you feel free to contact me and I will provide you with that information. So first of all, gay and bisexual men and transgendered individuals are often attacked and challenged to defend themselves, to act like real men or to be a real man, and that stems from ideas of masculinity that we have in our culture. Lesbians are more likely to experience gang rape than heterosexual women. Lesbians, bisexual women, and transgender people are often sexually assaulted or raped in the name of attempting to turn someone straight or to put them in their place regarding their sexual orientation or gender identity. This is also called corrective rape. Rates of sexual violence directed at transgender people over the course of their lives are extremely high, with the most common finding across surveys and needs assessments that about 50%, or 1 in 2, transgendered people report unwanted sexual activity at some point in their lives. Before we move away completely about statistics, just keep in mind that statistics on sexual violence are always skewed in the fact that, as we know from being advocates and working in the field, that victim survivors don't always report. And going back from what Eric had said earlier, being an LGBTQ identified victim survivor has sort of a double-edged, sort of double-blind in that not only will you be coming out as a survivor, but you'll also be coming out as LGBTQ. So therefore, the rates of folks actually reporting LGBTQ sexual violence is very skewed. These numbers are very, very low. So as you can imagine, the prevalence is actually much higher than what the research actually shows.
So now, at this point during the presentation, during the webinar, we really want to talk about what these letters that we've been using throughout the session mean. So we're going to have a little quick conversation about language. So to start off with the L of LGBTQ, L is for lesbian, or a woman whose affectional attraction or romantic feelings are for women.
G stands for gay. This has a couple meanings. The first meaning, a man whose affectional attraction or romantic feelings are for men. Gay is also used as an umbrella term for the entire community and the entire LGBTQ community. Examples you might have heard are the gay community, gay pride. Just keep in mind that this term, while it's used as an umbrella term, is also very limiting. And by using the term gay to identify the entire spectrum of sexuality and gender identity, you are making folks within that spectrum invisible, and you're ignoring their individual needs and their individual selves. So just keep that in mind. But so I wanted to address that. Sometimes you will hear that.
And gay does not refer to stupid. I have to throw that out there.
Right. Right. So that's so gay. It's a good place to address that. Sometimes you'll hear the phrase, that is so gay, and that's obviously not acceptable terminology, because what the person is trying to say is that is stupid, or that is lame, or blah, 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 blah. And so the term gay being equated or synonymously used with stupid or lame is obviously offensive and should not be said.
Humanizing.
Right, dehumanizing.
And there are a lot of efforts among some educators working with teens, specifically in middle school, junior high, high school, that are using these terms. There are a lot of campaigns and resources, especially online, that you can print out posters, you can order buttons, things like that, talking about creating a space within a school or wherever youth are where this is unacceptable language.
April 15th is the Day of Silence this year as well. That's this Friday, where gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender youth go to school and they refuse to speak. So it's a day of silence and to fight that. Bisexual. These for bisexual, a person whose affectional attraction or romantic feelings may be for people of any sex. Does not mean a person who's bisexual has relationships with both men and women at the same time. Usually what you find is the person who's bisexual has a relationship with one person. Just so happens to be a person of the same sex or opposite sex. And they can open their hearts to both.
T is for transgender, and this is an umbrella term that encompasses a wide range of people whose gender identity or expression may not match the sex they were assigned at birth. So this could also, in other words, could mean someone who maybe when they were born, the doctor said, it's a boy, but at some point in their life they decided that that's not the gender that they want to express or present to the world. So they might identify as a transgender woman, they might identify as a woman. But this is a term that, again, is used as an umbrella term to talk about those folks.
And Q in this example, and we're going to go into Q as something else here in a moment, but in this example, Q stands for queer. Queer is an inclusive term that some people in the LGBT movement have reclaimed from its negative connotations to identify themselves either in addition to their LGBTQ identity or as a separate identity that represents non-conformity to any or all gender identity. So you might be saying to yourself, well, I thought queer was a bad word, or it was put as a put-down for people. Yes, this is true. Some people do use those words in that context, which is why some folks in the LGBTQ, or LGBT, rather, community don't embrace the term. However, some folks absolutely do. They take on this term and they say, you know what, I'm going to reclaim it from its negative connotation. I am queer and I'm okay with that. And it's going to be a part of my identity or it's going to be my whole identity. So in other words, a person could identify as a queer lesbian or just as queer. Or another example as gender queer. You might hear that. So again, it can be completely on its own, or it can be in addition to or in conjunction with another identity.
And I'm going to cover the QIA2H. The other way we can use it is for questioning. This is to encompass people who just aren't sure where they fit in sexual identity expression or gender identity expression or sexual orientation. Because it is so fluid and because at times in life it might change, Q stands for questioning. I is for intersex. Intersex is an individual who is born with physical gender expression that possibly does not fit in between the male or the female. And it does not mean they're abnormal. It does not mean a person is wrong or has a birth defect. It means that their actual physical or hormonal differences are that not of a male or female. There's a large volume of information online for Intersex Society of North America, which you can research this more. It's a term that they're trying to reclaim, saying that you don't have to choose the gender for your child. So if a baby is born with questioning gender traits, the parents know the right to choose. The baby can be intersex and then grow into what gender they feel they want to express. A is for ally, and that's anybody who considers themselves friends, family, loved ones of these communities. It's a person who stands up beside the others, supports them, gives them reprieve, gives them a safe place. 2 is for twin-spirited or two-spirited, and that's a common term that can be used in some Native American cultures to describe, like third generation is another, a gender expression or sexual orientation that is other than heterosexual. And H is to include those that are HIV positive, because often you'll find those who are HIV positive in these communities are also victimized at a higher rate than others. I covered everything there.
And now that we've talked about terms, I just want to make a few quick notes. Terms are crucial. We've been really stressing this throughout the webinar. It gives someone the opportunity to identify themselves, to really own that identity, to be empowered. And by you using those terms and following their lead, you're really validating and empowering them and creating that safe space. And it's also an opportunity for them to relate to the world in a certain way. It's a context of how they interact with the world around them. And with that said, they can also be meaningless. All of our gender identities and sexual orientations are ever evolving. It's very connected to that coming out process. It can change throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the life. So really we want to not look at terms as these very rigid things, but they're very fluid. They can change, they can evolve, they can come to mean different things. And as we've said before, we really want to use the term the person uses. So there are really no limits. These letters, these identities that we've talked about, this is by no means exhaustive. There are a number of different ways that a person could identify with their relationships, with the people that they love in this world. So we really want to make sure that we're supporting them as we're talking.
And they're culturally specific as well. From different cultures, you'll have different terms. My favorite is Chinese, is comrade. Comrade, I cannot pronounce the word, but you can look it up online. That's a slang term for what we would consider a gay male. MSM, you often hear, it's men having sex with men. They're very culturally specific terms, and sometimes people will say, well, are you gay? And they'll say, no, I'm not gay. That's what white boys are.
Right.
Versus their own culture. So remember that they're all culturally specific as well. So we have to feel comfortable with other cultures. There are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, questioning, allied, and those with HIV in all cultures in society.
So now we're going to move on to some stories of folks who did not survive. And we think it's really important to bring to light their stories and to talk about the fact that sometimes when folks who identify as LGBTQ are targeted for sexual violence, or they're targeted in general because of homophobia or because of hate crimes, sexual violence often accompanies that violent act as a way to dehumanize and shame that person. So we're going to bring up some stories of those who did not survive. But before I do, I want to say that if you are uncomfortable at all during this part, feel free to fast forward through this part of the webinar. Take care of yourself. These stories are not easy to hear. So we wanted to give you time. We want to give you a moment during this slide. If you would like to fast forward, I'm going to pause for a minute so that you can do that.
The first slide is that of Udi Simile. Her partially clothed body was found in South Africa in 2008. She was a former star of South Africa's acclaimed Banya Banya national female football squad. She was found in a creek in a park in Kiwasema on the outskirts of Johannesburg. Simile had been gang raped and brutally beaten before being stabbed 25 times in the face and chest and legs. As well as being one of South Africa's best-known female footballers, Simile was a ferocious equality rights campaigner and one of the first women to live openly as a lesbian in Kwazema.
"20-year-old Brandon Tina was brutally murdered on December 31st, 1993, after being raped and beaten by two assailants in the days before her death, or his death, my mistake. He was stabbed and shot in the chest, execution style under his chin. His story is portrayed in the movie Boys Don't Cry.
This is Lawrence King. Lawrence King was an 8th grader who identified as gay. He wore makeup and nail polish. And he was 15 when he was declared brain dead on February 13th, 2006. The day before, he had been shot in the head in an Oxnard, California classroom full of students. Police have charged Brandon McInnery, who was 14, with first-degree murder and with a hate crime. According to the Los Angeles Times, McInerney and some other boys accosted Lawrence King about his sexuality on February 11th. Students apparently often taunted King, who did not have a safe home to return to after school. He was living in a shelter for abused and troubled children.
So now we really wanted to share the strengths and the wonderful programs that are being developed by a local center in Pennsylvania. And Eric is going to share some of the things that he has been able to do at SARC to engage LGBTQ communities and individuals and care for survivors.
I would like to thank you all first off, but the very first thing is to, after we go through this daunting information, the stories you just heard, is to remember that there's a lot of strengths we already have. It seems overwhelming, but we have strengths in the feminist movement and skills inherent to our work that make us exceptional allies in working with the LGBTIQ communities. We have the ability to build upon our capacity for giving a survivor voice. We have the ability to build upon making safe places and honoring a victim and honoring their stories. And we have the ability to stand there with someone's journey, no matter how many twists and turns there are. And even though the survivor is being judged from the outside world. Those are the skills we already bring. We just change the words. We have the same feeling, the same heart, the same sentiment behind what we do and the work we do. And we can honor that, especially after taking a moment to hear the stories of people's lives who have passed. It can feel overwhelming, and you need to take care of yourself as well in this work, because as your heart reaches out to more and more, like early on in the movement when our hearts reached out to more and more victims of sexual violence, we can become overwhelmed and burned out. That goes into my next point. If you have a person who identifies themselves as LGBTIQAH in your community, in your staff, they should not be seen as expert or a resource in your center. They should not be viewed as the person you run to with all the questions, or they would have all the answers for these communities. This can burn out that staff member, and it can target them. It can make them feel uncomfortable. If a person comes forward and says, yeah, I'm willing to help with that, that's one thing. But that doesn't give a blanket statement. Just because, for example, I identify as gay does not mean I will do everything gay now until I end working in SARC, whatever that means. But I have my own life. I have my own needs. I need to take care of myself. And I cannot be viewed as the token gay that works at SARC, even though I am out. When we start working on language and we refer to intimate relationships in terms of partner or other inclusive and neutral language, I'm just going over what we already said over and over and over again. Let the individual tell their own story and define their own story, give their own context. That context is important for how they view the world around them, how they relate with the world around them, but how they relate with the emotions inside of themselves. And it's evolving. When you work with survivors of sexual assault, often they will evolve the term victim to survivor. They have to start off with some place of pain and say, I'm a victim. Something has been taken from me. Conversely, a person can start off with a very negative view of what it means to be gay. But they have to give that context themselves, and you work through them with that when they're talking about their survivor story and let them evolve that term. And also let them remember that sexual orientation and gender identity is completely different. So let them identify that. I can't stress that enough. Visibility, yet again. At our center, we have safe space stickers, we have artwork, we have postcards that you'll see at the end. We create visibility for this community, and we do it networking. When I go to meetings, I take along that bubble that Liz so eloquently discussed with me everywhere I go. Yes, it burns a little bit brighter being that I'm gay, however, I take it. It doesn't come off because I'm in a police station. It doesn't come off because I'm in the courthouse. It doesn't come off because I'm in the ER. I am there, and I'm part of this. People get burned out with you sometimes when you're an ally. Just like you've been kind of viewed as being a feminist who is always bringing up the sexual assault, always bringing up the trauma issues, always talking about women and children who have been abused. Well, now we're taking on, and you're saying you're taking a step forward. I don't care where sexual violence comes from anywhere. But you are taking on the gay and lesbian, so you could be viewed as maybe the gay or lesbian advocate, the crusader. I kind of like that badge some days, but some days I don't. So take care of yourself. Realize there's a lot of different ways you can take that bubble with you. Even if it is that you only know there's one clerk at the courthouse that is gay, so when you go over, you say hi. Ask them how their day is, if they need anything. That can be sufficient for that moment. You reach out to other agencies and contact and networking. There are lots of agencies throughout our state that are struggling to make ends meet. We all know that. So you reach out, and between three of you, you can accomplish a lot more and create more visibility. The next slide is on visibility in symbols, use of symbols. Each of these symbols mean something very distinct. The pride flag was created in San Francisco. Each of the colors represent a different community, the purple representing the gay and lesbian community. The pink triangle came from World War II and the Nazi concentration camps. It was designated to be a lesbian if it was turned the other way. This way it's a gay male. The ally, of course, on the pride flag, meaning you're part of the community. The next symbol was told to me that it's a bisexual one. It's a bisexual symbol.
Yes, it can also be used for the transgender community.
That's how I knew it. Trans community. And then the last one is just a cute little button, me too, another straight person for marriage equality. It's okay. It's only love. These little things, I'm telling you, you drive down the highway and you're driving along and you see an HRC symbol, which is equality, you're like, ooh, who's that in that car? And you feel a little bit brightened. It brightens your day in a sea of people who are against you. So that survivor might come into your rural area and see your one sticker on your car or in your window, and that brightens their day because at least one person cares. One person's in the same boat. And the next, in developing an internal capacity for your agency, go to workshops, become inclusive, join listservs, talk at staff meetings, invite community professionals, conduct services. These things are very important to build your internal capacity. Train yourself. And it doesn't mean that there's somebody on high that's going to come down and teach you all there is to know about lesbians. But it does mean have conversations about it. Get your staff talking about it. Start the conversations. And more than just the conversation, have the backup with those trainings. So what is the next step beyond those trainings? And if another person in your agency makes a remark, a joke, have courage professionally to comment on that joke. What are you talking about when you're making that joke? If they say, that's so gay, confront them. You mean that's stupid? What do you mean by that? Become a visible ally in every place that you can, again, and that includes your workplace. The workplace often can be the most difficult because the workplace you get your money from, you have most of your work relationships there. So some people have work husbands and work wives and work neutral spouses, and you really connect with these people for 8 hours a day, 4 hours a week, and you work through times of crisis and stress. So working through some of these issues can be much more intimidating than working with a stranger. Often we put on our shields when we talk to police officers or the hospital staff. We're like, we're here as victim service advocates. We can put these shields up. But your coworkers, it's much different because you already have your shields down, your guards down. So when you have these, look at your policies and procedures. What happens if you have a conflict with another staff member who's making gay jokes? What do you do with that? Where does your agency go with that? Does your agency have any sort of bereavement time for spouses that are same-sex? Do they have policy and procedures for things like that? Really get that conversation going. And the more areas you get that conversation going, it's like growing a garden, the more fruit will come out of it. So back to our feminist roots, keep it going. And then the last one is being an advocate for the centers is not just us. We have to be an advocate for the other local centers, not just our own personal center, but the center next door in the next county, or the Gay and Lesbian Center, or the gay and lesbians in that area. So you be an advocate, if you can, at all meetings. You bring up the gay and lesbian issues. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. So to support centers and local programs like SARC, PCAR has really invested a lot in developing technical assistance, training materials, and things to help build that capacity to support those efforts. And my contact info and Katie's contact information will be listed at the end if you're interested in finding out more about that, what's coming down the pike, what has already arrived. So we're very excited to make sure that all programs are able to be sustainable and to be supported. There are some handouts and resources available that you can download with this webinar. There's a list on community-based agencies in Pennsylvania. There's some online resources that you can check out. There's a PDF with clickable links and some language and definitions guides, and then also an example of SARC's wonderful postcard for creating and welcoming all the communities that they serve.
So at this time, what we want to do is thank you for being a part of this webinar, of this training, rather, of opening yourself up to receive the information, and if you already had the information, to further your information, and we hope that you did learn something today. But we wanted to say thank you, and we wanted to celebrate you as an ally for now, like I said, advancing your knowledge and just opening yourself up to helping us serve the LGBTQ community, especially when it comes to victim survivors of sexual violence. So thank you for your continuing support.
And there's my contact information. Feel free to please contact me if you have any questions or concerns. I don't mind being a token most days, so I will answer as much as I can. And there is no question that I won't say if I'll answer or I won't answer. But you can ask me personal questions as well. I'm very open. Thank you.
And there is our information. Of course, I'm Katie Taylor again. I'm the Technical Assistance Coordinator. There is my email, my telephone number with my extension, and that I'm just now saying that extension is wrong. It is
117.
My extension is actually 117. But anyway, that is my correct email, so feel free to email me anytime with any questions regarding sexual violence, but specifically to LGBTQ sexual violence. I am more than willing to help you with resources or information.
And there is mine. I'm Liz, and I'm the Education and Resource Coordinator. So if you're looking specifically on stuff for educators or prevention programming, you can give me an email, and that is my correct extension, 115. And I welcome all questions, comments, and feedback. So thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.